Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
All right, I'll kick us off here. It's a pleasure to have you back for our next to last session of the Nonprofit Management Institute. We'll be discussing financial management and also fundraising, two very important topics for all of you, I know. So we're excited to get rolling here. I'm going to go ahead and pop it over to you, Lisa, to go over our agenda and what we'll be discussing today.
Sure. Jean, our CEO, couldn't be with us today, but sends her welcome. And I too, welcome. Moving right along, won't hold you much before we move it on to Dr. Palmer. But again, welcome to day 5, financial management and fundraising. Again, like to extend a warm welcome to our sponsors who's making all of this possible for us. And just to quickly go through agenda, it's another packed one. As you can see, Dr. Palmer will do a short reflection of what we did last session 3, for session 4, actually, for strategic planning. We did do strategic planning in session 4, didn't we? Yes. Then move on to financial management, fundraising. As you can see there, it's pretty packed on the fundraising. Wrap it up with our evaluation and then give you some details on graduation and what to expect next week. So without further ado, we'll move it right on to Dr. Palmer.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. Can you all hear me? Can everybody hear me? I think everybody can hear me. Okay, I thought I was hearing someone saying something or something. Well, good morning and welcome back to the Nonprofit Management Institute. We have 2 topics today. Hopefully everyone received their wraparound information. We always try to follow up with pertinent information, in particular the PowerPoint presentation, so that everyone has that. In terms of our previous session, of course, that topic was strategic planning, and we had lots of information to cover as it related to strategic planning, and we're hoping all of that was helpful to you. We have, in terms of just a review and a little bit of a reflection, we wanted to go back to the SWOT analysis. The SWOT analysis handouts are on page 95 in the manual. And then I also want to share 2 additional examples of a program goal, action steps, and outcomes, an outcome statement. And we also, some of you may be very familiar with SMART goals, but may not be as familiar with SMART-T and SMARTER goals. And so we wanted to just highlight that when we were debriefing after our session last week, we all began to talk about how the SMART goal concept has evolved. And so we want to share a few little nuggets about that. We noticed in talking about it that what's trending now related to strategic planning is this notion of adding some components to the SMART goal concept. So we want to share that with you as well. If we could go back to the gallery. And in terms of the SWOT handout, hopefully everybody has been able to kind of grab that. How are we feeling this morning? Give me some reaction buttons. Give me some reaction emojis. I guess I said reaction buttons, but I guess they're reaction. Is it emojis or symbols? Okay. I see some thumbs up. Great. Great, great, great. Rushed, long morning already. Got boosted. Oh, got boosted. Ah, okay, okay. Well, rest yourself. Definitely rest yourself. Some of us are a little tired. Ah, okay, okay. Second Monday of the week. Well, working and or volunteering in the nonprofit sector definitely is ever changing, right? In a nanosecond, you could be doing who knows what. So I certainly get that. And for those of you who have, I see that there are quite a few folks that are not feeling well today or have family members that aren't feeling well. Take care of yourselves. That's important. Very, very important to do that. And we'll keep you in our hearts and minds today as you're pressing through and pushing through that. Let's see, I'm switching over frames now so I can, where are my coffee tea drinkers? I see. Okay. I haven't had my first cup yet this morning, so I'll definitely do that when we take a break. It's good to see all of you, and we are in for a treat today. Okay, all right. So not real quick, but fairly quick. We wanted to do just a little bit of review of the SWOT analysis and just talk about that a little bit. So the SWOT analysis is facilitated in a variety of ways. It is sometimes facilitated as a way to look at the entire organization and its ability to do what has been outlined as focus areas in a strategic plan. So sometimes it's done that way. And then some of us facilitate the SWOT analysis process as a part of strategic planning by specifically looking at each goal or studying each goal and doing the SWOT as it relates to a particular goal. So both ways work. I as your facilitator, prefer the latter, because what it does is, in that process of planning strategically, the board, staff, and the executive director are put in a position where they really have to study each of those individual goals and have some discussion around, is it feasible or is it possible for us to accomplish this goal, to see this outcome be realized, and to actually implement the action steps. It is not uncommon to review your strategic plan after it's been implemented, to review it, which we should be doing. We should be keeping up with our progress. It's not uncommon to do that and change strategy or modify the action steps. Typically, the goals and the outcomes, for the most part, kind of stay the same through the duration of the plan. But oftentimes the way we get there, it changes because things change. And I mentioned this last week that we've moved away from doing like 5-year plans and 10-year plans. We commonly do 2- and 3-year plans because things are just changing so rapidly. So I wanted to kind of just focus on that a little bit, but I also wanted to ask if there were any questions about the SWOT analysis and conducting the SWOT analysis. I don't see any questions in the chat. Sophia, I am loving those eyeglasses. I am loving those. They're so cheerful. I don't see any questions, team, in the chat. And I don't see any hands raised. So I'm thinking that we're okay to move forward. Why don't we go ahead and talk about and share, Rebecca, the Smarter goals, and I'll come back to the additional examples.
So while Leslie pulls that up
Okay.
for us, we've got, give us a sense of whether you've heard of SMARTY goals with the IE attached there. You can give your, I'm seeing some heads nodding. Yep, hands up. So you guys are familiar with this. It's an effort to put an equity lens on your goals. And I love this example here. I see some say this is new to them. So the traditional SMART goal is specific, measurable. You'll see different words they put in here: attainable, ambitious, relevant, time-bound. And then they added this IE for inclusive and equitable. And so this example that they give here, they offer up, is a SMART goal of expand youth mentorship program with 3 new counties by the end of June. That's a good goal. Nothing wrong with that goal per se, but how can you build on that with this equity forward approach? And then the example here: expand youth mentorship program into 3 new counties by the end of June with volunteer task forces that are representative of the community by age, gender, race, and other characteristics, advising the expansion. So, wow, they just took that up a notch. It's very specific, and it speaks to both an inclusive goal as well as being equitable. So that's something that you can think about as you're looking at what goals you have, and having, I know that for the center, each of our program departments or each of our departments are looking at our goals and our strategic plan and thinking about how we can infuse equity and inclusion, and also diversity. It's not listed here, but our real goal is to get towards that, to get to equity. And then if you look at the next slide, SMARTer goals is another one. And this adds a sense of goal tracking. So the first 5 letters of SMART are goal setting and alignment. And then the last 2 with the ER are for evaluate and recognize and reward. So really getting a sense of how you can have that continuous circle around your goals. So you're constantly looking at that feedback loop about how things are going, making changes in real time. So being able to think about your goals and also your strategic plan as a living document, something that you're going to continue to assess, make sure it's still working, what's not working, making adjustments, and thinking about how you can sort of keep that as a working document for your organization. Anything else, Dr. Palmer, you want to say about either of those?
No. Does anyone have a comment, or are there any thoughts you're having about the addition of these other ways of thinking about SMART goals? And you can unmute. Go ahead.
I think Rebecca said it. You see so many different ways of using it. I was on a project with a group of people from Europe, and when they use SMARTer goals, the R ended up being a review of everything at the end. And then I was with a HR team, and the M was for motivational. So it depends on, where you are and the culture of the organization where you put SMART and SMARTer goals.
Thank you, Eric. Are any other just comments or thoughts about the framework? This is used in both, also in business settings, in government. It is a very common way of crafting goals. And most strategic planning processes are going to have this as one of the steps in some form. So it is important to kind of do that. Someone had a question about, are these goals in the handbook?
The Smarty and the Smarter goals are not, but they'll be included in this wraparound when we send out the slideshow. You'll see these slide decks for reference.
Yeah. And I also think we can go back to gallery now, Rebecca. I also think it might be a good idea, to Eric's point, there are different frameworks that are available for us to use. If you do a Google search for SMART goals, you will get, when I say a gazillion, you'll get all these different frameworks, all these different images to help you to kind of understand we were talking about it in the sense of what's trending right now, because it's changing. And with equity, diversity, and inclusion being at the top of the priority list for a lot of organizations, we see where those two elements are added to the SMART concept or the SMART framework. Dr. Chance has her hand up.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer and Ms. Beck, Ms. Crossland. If you could go back to the slide. I just had a comment on the outline of the slide. I know you said it's not in our handout, but just looking at how you have the goal setting and alignment and the goal tracking, I really like how that's outlined there. And why it's outlined there, a lot of times I think we are doing those things, but not actually seeing it outline and process there. So I really like how you have that there, and this gives us an opportunity to share with our teams as it relates to our board and our direct reports. I have not seen that or heard of the Smarty or Smarter, although we're doing those things, but not actually having that format. So thank you for sharing that resource.
Thank you, Dr. Chance, for that feedback. I concur. I had not, when we all met as a team, I had not heard of the Smarty. I was familiar with SMART and Smarter, but not Smarty. And so, of course, our resources are changing all the time. There's some elements of what we do around building capacity of nonprofits that pretty much have been consistent, in terms of kind of how we do what we do. But there are times like this where, based on kind of what's happening in our world, really, we'll see some changes as it relates to kind of what tools we have. And as you can imagine, the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits has lots of tools. And so we try to incorporate those when we can, even though we may not have originally planned to have it, which is why you don't have it in your manual. Sometimes things just surface and we add it as we go along. So just want to make sure we're keeping up with some of what we introduce to you whenever things change. I also want to share with you, these are two examples, and these two resources will come to you in the wraparound as well. I want to highlight two goals. One is a program goal, and the other is what I call a nonprofit goal. So one is a goal that's specific to programs, and the other is specific to the nonprofit or a nonprofit organization as a whole. So if we could show those, it doesn't matter which one comes first. So what we have here is we have a sample. Remember when we worked last week, you have worksheets, and we kind of coached ourselves through how to create a goal and action steps and outcomes. Well, that's what we have. That's what we have here. And so we have the goal statement at the top, which is one of the goals that we shared last week. So this is a nonprofit management goal. And then you have the action steps and you have the outcome statement. And then there's what we call a program goal, because some of our goals are specifically related to programs. And yes, when you are designing, remember we talked about the 25 characteristics of designing, managing, and evaluating a program, and we had the checklist. Well, oftentimes when we're writing grants and or planning for programs, the entity that we're communicating with, they want a program goal. And so here is an example of a Swim for Life program. And basically the goal is to teach school-age children how to swim. And to do that by providing them swimming lessons. And this happens to be at an academy called the New England Academy. Well, then you have your action steps there listed. Specifically what we're going to do, we're going to determine a proficiency test that we're going to use. We're going to teach them how to swim. We're going to enroll students. We're going to do the test. We're going to design a schedule. We're going to do all those things. And then our outcome that we're hoping to achieve is that once we pursued the goal and implemented these action steps, we're hoping that we'll be able to report at least 75% of students that are enrolled in the Swim for Life program, that they will learn to swim and that they will do it within 6 months and that they will pass the swim test. So when we think about writing goals, we just wanted to just come back to you with just a few more nuggets in terms of how you might go about doing this and how you might pursue this. If we could move the goal just up some, thank you. I just wanted you all to be able to kind of see that full picture because last week we focused on a nonprofit goal and we wanted to share with you a program goal. Are there any comments or questions about that?
Question. So the action steps internally, would you set specific measures for those? For example, write the grant to secure funds by a certain time frame to meet that. So all those action steps would have a time frame.
So you could very well write your action steps so that they are SMART as well. So you could have SMART goals, SMART action steps, and I write SMART outcome statements. So I use the SMART framework all the way through. But yes, you could very well add those components to your action steps.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have another question, and this may just be organizational, but I find myself as the executive director utilizing SMART goals and planning, and some of our leaders do the same, but I'm having a harder time getting it circulating throughout the organization and having it really be a tool, not just something that they look at and go, okay, here are our goals and set aside. Is there any advice that you have for really integrating and implementing SMART goals as the most commonly utilized practice as we work toward our overall outcomes in program operations?
Yes, I do. What I would suggest is that if possible, and I know sometimes within a nonprofit setting, we have very few staff, like we don't have, a lot of staff that's helping us do what we're doing. But what you could do, for example, if you have staff meetings, you can very well incorporate a part of that time to talk specifically about goals and outcomes. And you can really coach them if some of them if they're not familiar with the concept or with the framework. You could introduce it there and then you could just continue to reference it. And then that way it becomes a part of the way you report out. So you could report out as in alignment with the in alignment with the acronym. Does that make sense?
It does. Yes. Thank you. I think it's just going to require a real shift. You know, I've been there 2 years. We've been really reactive, of course, during the time that I've been there, and we want to get everyone upstream. And I want to ensure that we're moving on a unified front, but it seems like something is missing once I get through to leadership, that there's just something that falls off after that point.
Well, one of the things, and we can go back to the gallery, one of the things about building capacity is that building capacity takes time. It doesn't happen quickly. And especially if we are wanting the individuals that we're working with, or the people, even partners and entities that we're collaborating with, if we really want them to, I'm going to use your phrasing, if we want them to shift, right, from engaging in one way to engaging differently, then what I typically recommend is you begin to insert that tool or that resource, or in this case, the framework, in the way you do what you're already doing. So you don't create a new or you don't insert a new concept completely as an extra something that we're doing. You insert it, or you incorporate it as a part of what that staff or that employee or that team or that board, what they're already doing. You kind of bring it into the mix, if I could say it that way. You bring it in as a part of what they're already doing. So as I was saying, if your program staff, let's just say, if they meet regularly, or if they report out regularly, it may be that you change the outline and the template and the framing of the way they report. And so while you're not, and then that way you're not necessarily forcing individuals to say, oh, use this. But what it is they begin to use it, and then all of a sudden you've got that change. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't introduce it and you don't share it and you don't talk about it. You do that as well. So you foundationally, you expose all parties involved and what it is that you're wanting to hear, see, experience. And then you just begin to incorporate it that way. I was just having a conversation yesterday with a funder that is looking for nonprofit organizations to fund for capacity building, right? But they specifically want to fund programs. They don't necessarily want to fund the nonprofit. They want to fund programs that provide resources and services to youth. And so they want to give these capacity building grants to programs to help them to use a quality improvement model, okay? And so we were talking about this very thing. Well, how do we do that? Well, if it feels extra, then most of us don't want more work to do. We don't want more work to do. And so we have to kind of be creative and insert it in a way where it really aligns with what people are already doing. I know that was a long answer, but I was just reminded of that conversation that we were just having about, well, we want them to use a particular model. Well, how do we do that? Well, don't make it extra. That's number one. And try to align it with what they're already doing. Was that Heather? Heather, was that you that made that comment?
It was.
Okay,
Yep.
good. Okay, I just want to make sure I had the right person. Okay.
Yep. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. It takes time. It does take time. You see any more questions? Or?
We also had a question from Aditi regarding focus groups. Aditi, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? Can I unmute?
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering if you have any advice about how to go about organizing those. And does it depend on the community? Sorry, does it depend on the community, or is it, just curious.
So the composition of your focus group is based on who you want to hear from. So the way I have inserted focus groups in the strategic planning process is once we have identified the board and the staff, right, have identified what those focus areas could be, Then in the focus group, you're sharing what they've identified so far, and you're getting feedback from those individuals in the focus group as to whether or not what we're anticipating including in our plan is what's needed based on what our purpose and mission is. And so the focus group is a feedback resource.
What's the best way of organizing those and finding the people to show up? And is that a whole nother conversation?
Well, it could be, but it could be, but it depends on that specific. If you're bringing the focus group together to give you feedback on those areas that you're going to be focusing on in your plan, then you want to hear from people that are knowledgeable about that particular focus area. So let's say the example we said for the nonprofit was a capacity building resource, and the goal example was Swim for Life. Well, if you're going to bring a focus group together around Swim for Life, that program, you want to bring people who are knowledgeable about that particular type of resource. You wouldn't bring, say someone who's a baker, right, to participate in that focus group. So you look at the areas that you want to focus in, and you bring people together that can speak to, have knowledge about, experience with, or in some way they can inform you on how maybe to approach pursuing that goal, and can give you feedback as to whether or not, from their perception, if it's really needed.
So sort of leaders in the field, like I want to get to what the community wants, but it's probably good to start with the leadership first before doing like community open events and the open questions.
You could do both, or you could do them separately, or you could combine them.
Great.
I mean, if I'm a parent and I'm a potential, and I have a child who potentially could be in that program, you may very well want me to be a part of that focus group. Okay. So it doesn't necessarily have to be community leaders. It could be a combination. The focus is the focus. The focus is the focus area. And so you want to get feedback related to from individuals who can speak to that particular area. And also there is a framework that I use. I won't be able to get into detail here, but it's called ORID, O-R-I-D. And if you Google that, it is a way in which you can engage a group in a discussion. And it has 4 phases to the discussion. Starts with the O, and then it ends with the D. And I'm gonna quiz you all next week to see who gets it up. But ORID, it's called ORID, O-R-I-D. And that is a way to frame a discussion. And I use that framework whenever I'm doing focus groups.
And do you find folks through churches, the why? I mean, if you're trying to get community input, are there any other suggestions?
You can do that. And you can also utilize your board, because your board will know individuals who can also speak to that. Now, if you're new to a community, it's gonna take a minute, right? Because you gotta figure out who's who and what programs you have and all of that. But your board and or your staff and or volunteers that assist you already, they can probably help you identify people.
Great. Thank you so much.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I know we have some folks who in our cohort this go around who arrived in a community that you didn't know. And then you had to figure out where everything was. So I think we can all relate to that in some form, but it does take time. But I would start with your current volunteers, your staff, your board, and begin to ask them who would be the folks that need to be at the table. Good questions. I would say we are all warmed up to get into both of our topics today. I don't see any more questions, team. I don't see any hands raised. So we can just stretch and get ready, because we're gonna focus on financial management and fundraising. So we have 2 topics today. And we also have a special guest with us today that's a part of our team. I say special guest, but She is really a part of our team, but I'm going to let Lisa, I'm going to leave her to introduce that, but to introduce her. But before we go to that, we are going to do a little bit of work in thinking about financial management, right? Financial management for a nonprofit. First topic of the day. And what we're going to do is we're going to do this in breakouts, right? We're going to do it in a breakout room. And we are going to give you a task to complete and then well, somewhat of a task. We want you to have some discussion. Our breakout is going to focus on financial management. So the conversation will be about that. So I want you to just take a minute to just look at this image. And I'm just gonna go silent for a second. Chris, you were supposed to wait until next week. Take a look at this image. Just for a few minutes. Thanks, Chris. We're looking at the whole image. We are, in terms of the financials here, we're looking at the breakdown. This comes out of an annual report. I'm responding to the questions team in the chat. This comes out of the annual report for this particular nonprofit. And this is where their resources have come in. So this is where their dollars came from. So this is revenue, I'm sorry. Yep, this is revenue. Okay, so we're going to go into breakout rooms, and in your breakout room, we want you to answer this question, and we're going to put the question in the chat. The question is, how does this image represent a nonprofit with a diversified revenue stream? How does this image represent a nonprofit with a diversified revenue stream? That is your question that you're answering when you go into your breakout rooms. Now, it's important to contextualize this a little bit. Our goal in nonprofit organizations is to diversify our revenue streams. And when we do that, we're seeking greater sustainability. And we're also advocating that nonprofits engage in fundraising and financial management simultaneously. So they work in tandem. We work where we're doing financial management, focusing on that, and we're also doing fundraising. And so oftentimes what I see is that we'll have fundraising over here, and we'll have financial management over here, as if they're two separate things. And really, your finance folks should be talking to your fundraising folks, because after all, in fundraising, we're going out to raise money so that we can meet our obligations from a financial perspective. And so we try to accomplish having a diversified revenue stream. And so again, your question that you're going to be discussing in the breakout or answering is how does this particular image represent a nonprofit with a diversified revenue stream? Now, I know sometimes when we go in breakouts, we don't remember what we've shown over in the gallery. So if you have your phone handy, I would just take a quick picture of the screen. And then you can refer to it while you're talking with your group. We also want you to take a little time to get to know each other as well while you're in the breakout rooms. And so please do introductions if you haven't been in breakout rooms together before, and then proceed in answering and discussing our questions. So Rebecca, I'm going to turn it over to you. I hope everybody had a chance to take a picture real quick.
Thanks, Dr. Palmer. I've got you all broken up into 7 breakout rooms. The link for that image is there in the chat. If you just want to click on that, you can pull it down. And I'll go ahead and put both that link as well as the question, broadcast that to all the breakout rooms as well. And we'll be back here in about 10 minutes. So about 10:20 or so, we'll all return back here to the main gallery.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. See y'all in a few. If you can hear me, my computer is acting up.
Is that? Oh,
Just
okay.
giving it a moment.
Okay.
Am I frozen? Okay, there we go.
Okay.
All right, I think we're back. All right, I'm going to open up all the rooms.
Okay. Hopefully you had a minute to do some introductions, but also to talk about this image that we shared with you. And so I'd like to hear back from maybe 2 or 3 of the breakout rooms, and just kind of share with us what your conversation entailed as it related to the image.
I'll jump in. This is Asia Washington. I was in group 2. We looked at the pie chart and everyone was amazed because it was very diverse. What I heard from our group is that we wish that we could have a pie chart that looked like this because there's multiple streams of income there, and we would all love to see that. I think what some of us said in our group that it's really difficult sometimes to do a lot of the fundraising part of it because you're so deep into the programming that it's hard for you to get a lot of that fundraising revenue. That's a lot of us said we were 501c3 or 4, so either very membership based. So I think this is something that we look at and we're like, ooh, we wish that we could have this. So, but yeah, and how difficult it can be, because when you're in the weeds and you're really working and you're doing all of the programming, how do you get out and get more, income or revenue through fundraising? Fundraising seems like to be a really tough spot. But we had some suggestions about, partnering with other nonprofits that are volunteer-based, or, recruiting volunteers to help with fundraising, things like that, and just how that looks from a board standpoint and something like that. But that's kind of where we sat there on it.
Thank you, Asia. Thank you for sharing for your group. And yes, diversifying our revenue streams is not an easy task. It takes time. I'm using that a lot today. It takes time. It takes time. It takes consistency in how you manage your finances and who's responsible. It takes a plan. It takes strategy. We talked about strategic planning last week. And so, yes, we do realize that it is a challenge. If you, we pulled this from the YWCA High Point website. And if you had talked to the executive director there 15 years ago, she would have been saying the same thing that Asia is saying today. But it took time and it took intentional work around changing the picture. And so it can happen. It can happen. It just takes work to do that. And we're going to learn a little bit more about how to do that today in our topic on financial management. I'm going to hear from a couple of more of the groups.
I'll go next, Dr. Palmer, for our group.
Please do, Carol, go ahead.
We're group number 7, and we had a lovely conversation. Pretty much all of us were on the same page as far as recognizing, as Asia noted also, that the YWCA had a nice diversification. They had a decent, more than a decent level of different streams of income. So it presented a very stable view. And the word that came out of our group that seemed to resonate was sustainability, because that is what you need to be sustainable. One of our members, she also definitely noted that the United Way was the largest, pretty much, I can't tell based on program, but close to program, as far as the largest, next to largest stream of income. And just a little, not really red flag, but a caution is to remember that United Way is community-based. It's based on giving as well. So when things are a little bit down or very down, hurricanes, pandemic, that giving does decrease because it's dependent on humans and beings giving of their funds that they might not have at that time. So we had a very similar conversation as Asia had indicated as well. But our thing that came out of our group was this organization showed a level of sustainability.
Thank you. Thank you for your feedback and thank you for representing your group. Also, if I could take that observation a little further, when you look at the funding in the image, the revenue from United Way, right? And you look at private foundations. Now, we may be making a little bit of an assumption that those are probably grants as well. So really United Way, that's grant dollars, right? And the private foundations, those are grant dollars as well. And then when you look at government, I would suspect a little bit of that is grant dollars, maybe contracts that they may actually have. So if you put private foundations, United Way, and government together, you've got quite a few grants that are coming in to create this picture. And so one of our theoretical kind of frames, if you will, for fundraising is that we want the majority of our dollars coming from individual donations, because those typically are unrestricted. And we don't want more than 1/3, right, of our budget or revenue coming from any one source. And so in this picture, we have quite a bit of grant dollars. That's not a 100% negative when we look at this, but that is an element of review that we should take into consideration. Let's hear from one other group.
I'll be glad to speak on behalf of Breakout Room 4. We had Dr. Chance, Emily Jones, Sophia, Melinda King, Bo Hardigree, which Bo, we talked just a little bit in getting to know each other. Bo and his wife are getting ready to start a nonprofit in Asheville and the Buncombe County area. They've lived in China for several years, and they're very interested in the foster care system and how to perhaps start a nonprofit to fill gaps there, not duplicate resources that are already in the community, but to fill gaps, because I'm sure that there are lots of gaps in the system. Dr. Chance indicated that in her county alone last week, 11 children entered the foster care system in 1 week. And so we kind of had that discussion, and we did not get into the micro looking, but we looked at the pie chart, and just our impression was the importance of having various streams of revenue to be as diversified as possible. In the event you lose a certain stream of revenue, that type of thing, it would not adversely affect the agency so much. I think what's evident by the YWCA here is it's not just an executive director trying to raise all the money. You can't do this without a development staff. So in some very small nonprofits, that would be very challenging. But I think this this is an example of someone that probably has a vice president or director of development, probably has 1, 2, or 3 staff assisting that person for all the grant writing purposes and applications and things of that nature, having special events, all this stuff. It requires person power. And so that's something that probably has to be built over time. The intentionality of development. Development is something that you have to do not 5 days a week, but 7 days a week, year round, to raise the funds necessary for your organization. That was kind of our consensus. Thank you, Dr. Palmer.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. And yes, all of the above. Yes. Those observations are key in terms of recognizing that one person doesn't create this picture and doesn't create this image. And it does take leadership, and it takes leadership around managing our finances. And we're going to hear again more about that. And thank you also, Chris, for introducing all of your group members. Appreciate that. There was a question in the chat about the program revenue. And so if we could go back, and I think there was a couple other questions too, team. I want to try to respond to those.
Yeah, we'll start with Joni's question regarding the YWCA being unusual and having a category program, which is both a source of money and something they have to fund.
Is it a question or is it a?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure if the question is whether or not that's unusual or
not. It's not unusual to have, for a nonprofit, to have programs that generate revenue. I mean, that's really what that is. YWCAs around the country have fitness and wellness programs. They have summer camps. They have after-school programs. And they also have a membership component. I think that is reflected in the chart. It's a small amount in this particular case of where those dollars come from. But no, it's not unusual for a YWCA or any other nonprofit to engage in offering programs where they do charge a fee. Sometimes their fees are sliding fee scales. And so, which makes the programs and services affordable for people who obviously communities that have varied income levels, just so that everyone can benefit from the programs that they offer. This particular YWCA has a, I'm not a swimmer, so would it be like an Olympic kind of pool? It upgraded and renovated the entire facility in the past 5 to say 7 years. And so they also can rent out that pool so that folks can have different tournaments and swim meets. I think I have that right, that they can have there. I don't want to speak for the YWCA. I did serve on that board several years ago, but I do know that their programs, there's some of their programs where it does require a fee, so they can generate revenue. Any nonprofit can generate revenue through programs. Is there another question?
No, I think that's all we had. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or unmute.
Great. All right. So this is the deal. So we started with where we want to end up, right? We want to look at our financial position and condition, and we want to size up where we are, and then we want to begin to make some adjustments as it relates to oh, thank you. I appreciate that, Rosemary. Thanks a lot. Uh, where are my swimmers in the class? I'm not a swimmer. I do okay, but I'm not a swimmer in that sense. But we want to strive. We want to strive to create a financial portfolio, right? And establish a position with our finances where we are communicating that we are not just surviving, but we are sustaining what it is that we are doing in our nonprofits each and every day. And so we wanted to start with this image because that's the end goal. That's where we're trying to get to. And as we educate ourselves today about financial management, our hope is that you'll take from that some of the ways in which you might want to make adjustments or changes to actually see that come true. I will say again, it does take time. It's not an overnight thing, not unless we get a windfall of money, right? Get a windfall of unrestricted dollars, and then we can do all kinds of things that we want and hope to do as it relates to managing our finances. So we're going to jump into our new topic. Thank you everyone for sharing. That was our warm up to kind of get our thinking going around what it is we're trying to accomplish. I want to turn your attention before we introduce another member of our team. I want you to turn to your manual. I just want to point out what it is we're going to be working with, the handouts that we're going to be working with, just to give you an overview of those. So when we refer to them, you know what we're talking about. So on page 102, you have a budget worksheet. This is a template that can be used to begin to kind of, if you've never created a budget, for example, for a nonprofit, here's a tool that can be used for that. And we're going to refer to that a little bit later. When you get to page 103, so this is where I'm going to go ahead and encourage you to, I don't know what everyone's hardware resource is like. I don't know if you have double screens. I don't know if you have, if you've printed off everything, and I don't know. So I'm going to try to coach us through how to access the information as we walk through it. But if you look at page 103, there is a link there. And there is a list of financial statements. If you could go ahead and make sure that you can access that information, you're going to be looking at a financial kind of financial statement document for an organization. It is a nonprofit for Big Brothers Big Sisters of Massachusetts Bay. Okay, so you're going to be referencing that. It is, just so you know, it's several pages, and it has each of those financial statements included in it. Okay, and you're looking at the 2019 financials. Okay, so I just want us all to be able to kind of get there. We're going to be referring back and forth to that information. And then also you see Form 990. Now, some of you may be very familiar with this and some of you may not. The Form 990 is the report that nonprofits submit every year to tell the IRS about how money is moving in and out of their organization, pretty much. And so there's a link there for a PDF of the 990. All of this is on the website. And when we get to this, you know, we'll keep referring. Thank you, Erica, for posting that link, and we'll keep posting the link as well. I just want you to know where we're going. And then the annual report, if you keep looking at page 103, same website, same nonprofit. This is all public information. We're going to be referencing one of their annual reports. And if you notice for this nonprofit, they have everything posted. They have all the 990s. They have their financial audit statements. They have the annual report. It's real easy to find on their website. So you have that. And those are the documents that we're going to be referencing. So that's what that page is. That page gives you all of that, page 103. Page 104 is a handout. We're going to be referencing this for generally accepted accounting principles, right? And that's the last handout in your manual as it relates to financial management. I just wanted to kind of put that out there that this is what we're referencing. So again, I don't know what your setup is in terms of when you're in a workshop like this virtually, how you access information and all. So I just wanted to give us all time to determine how you're going to grab hold to that information. And we're going to walk through this together. So there's no hurry there. Okay, Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us jump started for our financial management topic today.
Great, thank you, Dr. Palmer. I'd like to take a quick moment to introduce our guest speaker that's going to work with Dr. Palmer in talking through financial management. Tracy Carriette is responsible for the overall financial operations of the center, as well as audit and tax functions, budgeting, policies and procedures, and human resources. She began working at the center as an intern while attending Meredith College, where she received the BA Mathematics with a minor in accounting. A 20-year veteran of the center, she has more than 15 years experience in nonprofit accounting and human resource management. Previously, she worked as a staff accountant with a CPA firm specializing in nonprofit accounting and financial consulting. She currently serves on the not-for-profit committee of the North Carolina Association of CPAs. Thank you, Tracy, for joining us today.
Good morning. Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, Dr. Palmer and all the participants. I've enjoyed listening in on your conversation so far.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy, for being here. Team, we have a question in the chat about posting the links, and I think they are coming your way, the group. I think we have the financial link in the chat. Thank you, Erica posted that. And we're going to post these as we go along as well. So we have all of these for you. The 990 is posted there as well. So I don't want to, Tracy, give me just a sec. I want to make sure that everybody can access the documents. Okay, and team, Rebecca, do we want to go ahead and post? There is a comment here that what Erica posted isn't, may not be working. So if we could just go ahead and post those for everyone, that would be good. Or Leslie, either one.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and pop those in the chat, the links that we're using here that are stored in our notes section that you all can see, but we'll go ahead and pop those in there for you all.
Thank you. And again, you can also go straight to, this might make it easier for some of us. Oftentimes when links are put in the chat for me, I'm just speaking for myself. Sometimes I don't always get it right? So, but if you go to, this might make it a little bit more practical for some of us. If you go to the website for Big Brothers Big Sisters of Massachusetts Bay, if you go straight to the website and you look under accountability, financial, and under accountability, then it'll take you straight to that information. Rebecca, do you think we could go to the site and just show some folks just to make sure we're not leaving anybody behind? And I don't want us to feel hurried or rushed. I want to make sure that you are there before Tracy and I get started. So she's gonna show you here in the class how to go to that website and access those documents. And then we're gonna do a little bit of show and tell, right, Tracy?
That's right.
Can y'all see this?
You great. You are right there. So we are on their website. And if you scroll down, once you get to accountability, you'll see all of this information is at your disposal. Okay. Go to the, Rebecca, go to their homepage. Go to the homepage, yeah. All right, so here we are on the homepage. And then take us to About Us. And then we go down to About Us and you'll see Financial Accountability. You click there. And then when you get to Financial Accountability, voila, it's all there. You've got 5 years of audited statements, financial report, annual report, and 990. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. All right. So now who did I help? Be honest. Who did I help? Because I helped myself. See? Thank you. Sometimes it takes me a minute. So I'm sure that there's someone else out there that it takes them a minute as well. Yep, see, there's Chris. Yeah. All right, so let's have some fun. We're going to do a little bit of show and tell, and Tracy is our subject matter expert for today. I am going to MC the financial management part of our work. So let's go to the presentation. So we are going to focus on 3 areas as it relates to financial management. We're going to focus on financial transactions, internal controls and audit, and diversification of revenue. Remember, that's where we started. That was our warm up to begin to look at what a diversified portfolio looks like or could look like as it relates to nonprofit organizations. And so in thinking about our financial transactions, a couple of points I want to make as it relates to guidelines and policies. Financial transactions, guidelines, and policies. We can go to the next slide. So guidelines and policies are unique to every nonprofit, okay? Not all nonprofits, we already know that they don't operate the same. They're not managed exactly the same. And typically our nonprofit organizations are going to have some written guidelines and policies as it relates to how we manage the movement of the finances that we have or the resources that we have from a financial standpoint. The first place to look as it relates to nonprofits and financial management is the bylaws. In the bylaws, there will be instructions and explanations around how the board is to engage with financial management. For example, there will be a notation in the bylaws or an explanation as to whether or not an officer position is to be held, which is the treasurer, right? There will also be information in the bylaws that will identify whether or not a finance committee should be established and implemented. There will also be information in the bylaws that should this nonprofit dissolve, what will happen from a financial standpoint. It will be information in the bylaws that give us kind of an umbrella perspective as to what should happen if in fact a nonprofit engages in establishing a contract or making purchases of big ticket items. So that kind of information is found in the bylaws, and that's where we're directing you to as it relates to guidelines and policies. The other thing to remember about guidelines and policies is that some nonprofits actually have kind of what you might call a financial management guidebook or financial management instructions that have been developed specifically for that nonprofit. And Tracy, I'm going to let you speak to that from your perspective.
Yeah, I think developing things like a guidebook is always good for the organization. You want to use these for board and staff to have to follow along in the daily activities. It'll help you monitor transactions. It'll help you ensure that you're expending funds appropriately. And you probably don't have all of these developed all at once. But you can document them as you go, so that again, you just have those guiding principles on how to manage the financial transactions for the organization.
Any questions about guidelines or policies? Again, to reiterate, you know, people come and go in any organization. And so it's very important to give some guidance in writing. It's kind of like we have an employee handbook, right? So it's important to have those guidelines and policies in writing because, like I said, people come and go and we don't know who might be left to pick up where someone left off. And so if you have that information in writing, it would be a little bit easier for a person to kind of pick up and continue with the work related to managing finances. And again, your bylaws is a good starting point. And while the bylaws give us instructions as to how the board is to function, remember the board of directors provides governance and oversight. Financial management is an oversight duty. And so that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, and Dr. Palmer, there's a couple of folks asking for examples of guidebooks or manuals, and I'm sure the staff can help find some of those to share and maybe the wraparound. And then just to add a little bit more to these guidebooks, these can include things like who has check signing privileges, how many signatures you need, how you manage the various bank accounts within your organization, how you approve accounts payables, bills that you need to pay. All of those sorts of things are the things that you can find in a guidebook or manual around your financial transactions, which gets a little bit more specific than the bylaws and sort of the guidelines that it lays out there, as Dr. Palmer was saying. So yeah, we'll make a note to find some examples to be able to send to you all.
Okay, great. And then in terms of the next item on our list, as it relates to financial transactions, duties and responsibilities, right? So when we're talking about the various transactions, we're really talking about transactions related to revenue and transactions related to expenses. And so we are also talking about budgeting, budgeting as it relates to coming up and establishing a budget for a nonprofit on an annual basis is a common practice. And so we have to do that each and every year. It's important to remember that the financial or the fiscal, FISCAL, the fiscal year for a nonprofit, it varies. Some nonprofits are on a calendar year like January to December, and others are on different schedules. Some are July 1 to June, some are June 1 to May. It just depends on how and how it was established or what practice it is that your nonprofit has adopted. One thing you want to note, when a nonprofit is started, we complete an application, an IRS form, and it's a number 1023. In that form, we have to tell the IRS what our fiscal year is. So when our fiscal year begins and when it ends. And so it's not something we just get to make up. We get to change it and all that. If we do, then we have to make that adjustment. It typically that could show up in your bylaws as well. So revenue and expenses, when we talk about financial transactions, we're budgeting, reports and presentations, the IRS Form 990, the annual report, and the audit and the auditor's report. That was a mouthful, I know. That's a lot of work. But those are the duties and responsibilities under this area of management of our finances. And so what we want to do is we want to spend some time looking at the specific, these items specifically. So we're going to start with looking at the budget, like the example of a budget. So we looked at revenue when we looked at the pie chart from that particular organization, which in some ways infers what expenses might look like. Now we're going to look at budgeting. In your manual, on page 102, you have a template. It's a blank template that's not filled in yet as it relates to the different items you might see in a budget. And so we're going to take a look at a sample budget. Go to the handout first, though. Let me get over here to my pages. So when you look at your budget worksheet for a nonprofit, what's unique about a nonprofit budget that's a little different than a business budget is that you're going to see items like government grants and contracts, foundations. You might see United Way as a donor. You might see a membership, because there may very well be program income. We saw that in the example that we looked at. So those are the types of things you would see from a revenue perspective. As it relates to expenses, pretty common across sectors, right? So you might see these items in a business, in government, and of course in a nonprofit. And so things like insurance and salary. Notice there's an item there, sub grants to partner organizations. So this is when a nonprofit receives funding and they're given the responsibility of distributing grants to other organizations. So they're considered like an intermediary type of entity to help distribute dollars to other organizations. And then of course, some common things like equipment, supplies, postage. But notice there's an item there under expenses related to fundraising. In this particular template, it's identifying fundraising fees, but there's also times when a nonprofit might consult with a firm to help it do its fundraising, if one is so fortunate, right, to be able to do that. And then of course, there's a category of other from both of these. So again, this is a general template. It's not exhaustive. There could be more, but this is a general kind of way of thinking about the line items that we oftentimes see in a budget with a nonprofit. We are going to show you the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits budget, and Tracy is going to share with you what is in that budget to try to give you a little bit more of a deep dive into budgeting for a nonprofit. So give us just a second, and we're.
You have a quick question.
Okay.
Eric is asking, do you cover in this segment North Carolina withholding number and NC unemployment number and rate? These are documents, so he's asking that.
No.
No, there's so much information that we could talk about, obviously. So we won't specifically talk about that, but a document that I think could be helpful, Eric, is our legal compliance checklist. Because it talks about filing for these types of numbers and the requirements for nonprofits related to North Carolina withholdings and unemployment. And so that is, if you're a member, it's downloadable off of our website. But it really does a good job of laying out all the legal compliance pieces of things that nonprofits need to do. And I know it includes those items that you're asking about.
Thank you.
So if we could pull up the NC Center budget, we'll go from there.
And while they're pulling that up for us to be able to look at and walk through, a couple of things about budgeting that I always like to mention, and you all have already touched on it before when you were looking at the diversification pie chart, is you want to get everyone involved in the budgeting process. It helps create buy-in and ownership of the budget across the staff. It's not just the responsibility of the finance person or the executive director. We talked about involving program staff and fundraising staff. It just helps you get a full picture of the organization's needs for the upcoming year. You also want, or the budget should be approved by the board of directors and monitored by both board and staff regularly. That'll mean different things for different organizations. It could mean monthly, quarterly. So it'll depend on your organization, but this allows for transparency amongst your board and staff. And you can also use those opportunities to discuss opportunities and challenges within the budget in case you need to pivot or have some strategic planning on how to address those opportunities and challenges. Because remember, your budget is just your best estimate of what's going to happen during the year. You're not going to know everything when you're preparing your budget. So, monitoring it throughout the year will help with that.
Real quick, we've had a couple of requests for a break. We're at about the halfway point in our today's session, and it will give us a few beats to pull up the budget.
Okay.
If that's okay, Dr. Palmer and Tracy.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Can we take a 10-minute break and come back here at 11:15? Great. Okay, we'll see you back here in 10.
Well, welcome back. I'll give everybody a few seconds to transition back into our space. We've got several items we want to finish out before we conclude our financial management topic for today. So what we're going to do next is walk through 4 different financial statements. We're going to look at a sample budget first, and which is kind of where we ended when we went into our break. So Tracy, I'm going to let you take it from here and just share with us what this budget is communicating.
Sure. What I like about this sample budget that we're showing you are the columns that they're using and how they're using them. So if you look at the first column, that's an actual to date column. So that lets you know where you are so far in the fiscal year. So this one happens to be through 9 months of the fiscal year. This is where their organization is. The next column is they're beginning to project their end of year. So where they think they're going to end up based on what's happened so far and what they know. Because again, the budget is your best guesstimate of what's going to happen throughout the year. And then, of course, they're including the approved annual budget for comparison purposes. And we're using all of these columns both for tracking and monitoring the budget throughout the year, but also for planning for next year's budget. So you want to use your prior year and current year numbers, and maybe some other financial data to identify trends, to be able to develop your budget for the next year. So Dr. Palmer already did a good job of sort of walking us through revenue and expenses. These will be different for each organization, but these are some common ones. You can see in the revenue section that they've detailed out the revenue showing the different streams to get to their total amount of revenue. And if this was something that I was doing, I would most likely also have backup to at least some of these line items. So you want to understand where the $1,000 for fiscal year 2024 for corporate revenue is actually going to come from. What businesses are you going to be going to ask, and how much are you going to be asking for, and what's the likelihood that you're going to get that money from them? So back up to these numbers is also important. It just tells you how you landed where you did. And then looking down at expenses, again, these are some common expenses that you would see in a nonprofit organization. You may not have all of these. You may have different ones than these, again, which is fine. And back up again where appropriate. So when you look at staff salary, you're probably going to have a spreadsheet that's going to list all of your staff and their current salaries and any changes that would be made to those during the year to get to your final number. So if you look down at the bottom where it's got revenue over expense, this is your bottom line. I think you always want to operate on a balanced budget. This one shows a slight surplus just by about $10 of revenue over expense. If you do have years where there's a difference, take time to discuss that difference. If it's a shortfall, have a plan for where those dollars are going to come from, or where you might be able to cut expenses if needed to get it balanced. And if you have a surplus, depending on the size of it, how will you use those funds in the future? Dr. Palmer, is there anything else you want to add here that I haven't touched on as it relates to the sample budgets?
The only thing I would say is that oftentimes there's a written narrative, and I think Tracy mentioned this at the top of her comments and explanation. Each of the line items, whether revenue or expenses, typically there's a glossary, right? And there are narratives that are written to explain each of the line items, so that when you're doing your recording and reporting and budgeting, you're making sure that the costs that you have identified are attached to the appropriate line item. So narratives are very common, especially if you don't have like a chief financial officer. Some of your nonprofits may have bookkeepers or record keepers. They may not even be on staff. They may be contracted folks that you're working with. And so you may actually be helping that individual to create and develop the budget. Now that should be across roles anyway, but sometimes depending upon your staffing or the lack thereof, the executive director and or another staff person might find themselves a little bit more involved in the budgeting. So
yeah, and that narrative, those budget notes can also help the board in better understanding the budget and what's in there and what they're approving. So that's another way that you can use that. That's a really great point, Dr. Palmer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There is a question in the chat, and we're going to try to get to all these, but I do have to pay attention to the time. So if we don't get to your question, we debrief after every session. So we typically take a look at those and try to make sure if we don't get it during this session, we'll try to revisit it when we circle back. And so Tracy, we're gonna do our show and tell, but we're gonna do it a little swifter as we're kind of walking through. But this is a very important part of financial management, is understanding the statements. and understanding what the statements mean. And so Tracy, I'm going to do less commentating, and I'm going to kind of have you kind of walk us through these examples. So we're going to now go back to the sample financial statement that we had you pull up, or financial documents. And we're going to start with financial position. So we're going to look at 4 different statements. We're going to look at 4 different statements. We're going to start with the financial position. And Tracy, I'm just going to turn it over to you, and just you kind of tell us what the purpose of the statement is and help us to know what we're looking at.
Yep, and I'm going to keep moving through all of these statements in the interest of time, but Dr. Palmer, interrupt me, or if folks have questions, so we can keep things moving. Okay. So the first, what I want to start by saying is, again, these statements that we're going to be looking at are coming from audited financial statements. So I want to start with that. Depending on your organization, you may or may not have an annual audit. If you use an accounting system like QuickBooks, it can also produce these types of statements for you. The first one we're looking at is the statement of financial position. It's also referred to as the balance sheet. This statement is going to show you current assets, which is what you own, liabilities, which is what you owe to people. And Leslie, you can stay right there for a minute, and we'll scroll through the sections in just a second. And then the last piece of this is net assets, or the equity the organization has. So this provides a snapshot of the financial condition of the organization for a specific period of time. So if we start with assets that we've got on the screen here, some examples of assets and current assets are going to be cash. So that's like your bank accounts, the money you have in your operating account, for example. Grants receivables or accounts receivable. These are things that are owed to you by somebody else. You would have a grants receivable when you got an award notification from a foundation for a grant that's coming in. You may have things like prepaid expenses. An example of that would be if you have a group health insurance plan for your staff, usually they bill a month in advance. So that is a prepaid expense. You're paying that in June for July insurance. You also might have inventory, property or equipment. So if you own a building, it could also be your computer equipment if it's valued at a certain amount, which will be different for each organization. And then other assets, you can see the list of examples there. Security deposit could be if you lease your office space, maybe you had to pay a deposit up front, that would show up here as an asset on your balance sheet. And then Leslie or Rebecca, if you could scroll down into liabilities. So the bottom half of this statement is liabilities. So you can have current liabilities, and some examples here are capital leases, which could be if you have a copier that you lease, maybe over a 5-year period, that might show up here. It can also be a lease on your office space. Accounts payable, which is, again, things that you owe to vendors for things that you've purchased or services that they've provided. You might have deferred revenue. Examples of that could be if you collected dollars for a service or event that hasn't happened yet. So for example, the center has deferred revenue related to its member dues, because you all get a year-long worth of membership. And so you're not gonna get all of those benefits in our fiscal year. So we have some deferred revenue. You could have long-term liabilities. Example that's not listed here, but probably something that some of your organizations may have experienced is a PPP loan. So, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a couple of rounds of the payroll protection loans. If your organization got that, it would show up on your statement of financial position as a long-term liability until hopefully that was forgiven by SBA, but that's an example of a long-term liability. And then you're going to have your net assets. So net assets are what would be left if you sold all your assets and you paid all your liabilities. And then you will see these broken down by without donor restrictions and with donor restrictions. And that just speaks to grants or contributions that your organization has received that are restricted by time or purpose, or without donor restrictions would mean that they're for general operating expenses. So I'm going to move us along into, I think the next one is the statement of activities. Yes. So this statement is referred to sometimes as the income statement or the profit and loss. It shows revenue and expense, what's going in and out for a reporting period. You can see here on this statement that, and this is a theme throughout, I didn't mention it on the last one, but you're seeing data from 2019 and 2018 for comparative purposes. So you can get a quick glance at year over year revenue and expense on this statement, for example. You can also see that they're breaking they've added columns for without donor restrictions and with donor restrictions, which I just mentioned on the statement of financial position. So when you look under revenues and other supports, these are going to closely align with your budget. It's going to show the dollars that are coming in. So it's going to show earned revenue, which are things like the special events for this organization, and then contributed revenue, which could come from individuals, corporations, foundations. You might have government grants listed as well, depending on your organization. And then you could have some investment revenue. This organization has an endowment, and so they've got that listed here as well. And then looking at expenses, these expenses will also tie back to your budget, but here they're shown by program or support area. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the functional expense statement, which we'll be looking at next, I believe. But it's just a different way to look at expenses, not quite on such a detailed level, but looking at the expenses that are for the programs and services that your organization provides. The last thing that you'll see is net assets at the beginning of the year and net assets at the end of the year. So that's just going to show you your changes in net assets resulting from the income and expense that occurred during the fiscal year. And so we'll keep scrolling to, I think the functional expenses, the next, yes. Okay. So the statement of functional expense is it shows the functional classification of an expense in addition to its natural classification. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that means as we go through the statement. But again, you've got your comparative data from 2019 and 18. And then you can see the supporting services, which is general administrative, fundraising and development. And they happen to have direct benefit to donors as well. And then you've got program services. So again, these line items here, which are your expense line items, are going to essentially match your budget line items. They're detailed out differently than they were on the statement of activities. It's a little bit more specific, you can see here. So when we talk about program services, these are expenses that are incurred to meet the mission of the organization through programs and services, either directly or indirectly. So there are expenses that your organization has that you can allocate across your support and program services. And there are different methodologies that can be used to be able to allocate these expenses. You just need to make sure that they are reasonable for your organization. An example, without getting too much into the weeds, is you could use staff time. So the percentage of staff time a person spends in a particular area could be a way to allocate an expense across program services and support services. We get a lot of questions about what's a benchmark for the percentage of program service expense to supporting services. And it really just depends on your organization. We want these to be true to how your organization operates. But I can say that I see anywhere from 70 to 80% program services, and then 20 to 30% support services. The functional expense is also, it's part of these audited financial statements, but it's also something that if you file a Form 990, you're likely going to have to do and report to the IRS as part of that document. So it's good to, some audits may not require this level of detail, but it's good to do it because you likely will have to do this anyways. The next page in this is just the 2018 data. I know they had a column for quick reference, but this is just the previous year data, again, for comparison purposes. And then the last one that we'll walk through out of this packet is this statement of cash flow that you're seeing on your screen now. So this statement provides data regarding all the cash flows received from operations and investments, and it summarized the movements of cash that come in and out during the year. So it's where the money is coming from and how it's being spent. You'll see that comparative data again for year over year. And so this is broken into 3 different sections: the operating activities, the investing activities, and the financing activities. So under operating activities, you're going to see cash from general operations or programs and services. And you can see some of the line items that are listed here and how they changed during the year. And then investment activities is going to be from the purchase or sales of assets, loans made or received. And then financing activities is cash from financing. So you'll see again a capital lease. It could be credit cards or other loans that would show up in that section. And then you'll see cash and cash equivalents beginning and cash equivalents ending. So this is just going to show you your change in cash over the year from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And I'll pause right there and ask Dr. Palmer if there's anything that she likes to add, I think before we maybe talk a little bit about the 990.
I think that pretty much kind of does what we want to accomplish, Tracy. So the main focus here in terms of what we're wanting to deliver is to understand what those different statements are. So thank you for explaining those. And I know we do have some questions in the chat, team, but to know what those statements are, what the purpose is for those statements, and to really know how those statements help us to better understand our overarching financial position and condition. And then what is it about what we see that we want to change, and then making some decisions to make those adjustments so that we can get that picture that we looked at the top of our working on this particular topic. So that's really kind of what our purpose is and what our focus is, and the objective of trying to do this. What I found is that a lot of times we don't know what these statements mean. And even for individuals who have served on board after board after board, heard these reports, a lot of times we're trusting, right, that the staff and let's say the board treasurer, we're trusting that they are explaining these reports and they're giving us the information that we need. Now, what I found to be true, that sometimes our nonprofits find themselves in a little bit of a situation as it relates to finances, because they really didn't understand. Those individuals step aside or are gone, and we don't have a really good understanding, and nonprofits find themselves in an odd place in terms of that. So our focus here is, again, to make sure that 1, we know what the statements are, 2, we know what the purpose of the statements are, And 3, we know how to interpret what we're looking at. So if we could go back to the gallery, and let's see if we can maybe answer some of the questions before we finish up with the topic. I think there were just,
Yeah, I think
there
there were a
was a couple
couple.
questions about, Go
Yeah.
ahead, Lisa.
So Francesca's asking, as a nonprofit, what is an acceptable amount to have in the revenue over expenses section?
To not have a deficit. That would be number one. That is the number one goal. But Tracy, you might have a percentage that you, I'm not aware of a percentage, but
No,
yeah.
it's going to depend on your organization. I mean, I think for the most part, you're going to be preparing budgets that are going to be balanced. And so you're not necessarily going to be projecting revenue over expense and hopefully not revenue under expense. But you may find that when you get to the end of the year, the actual, ends up being one way or the other. If it does end up being a deficit, then you have to take that into consideration as you move into the next year, because you didn't have enough revenue to cover your expenses. And if you're lucky enough to have a little bit more revenue than you do expense, then that just might help build up a little bit over time to be able to cover maybe some unanticipated expenses in the future. But I wouldn't say that there's a certain percentage or ratio. It's just going to depend on the nonprofit, and to try to always shoot for a balanced budget.
Great, thank you, Tracy. And I think we have one more. Should operating reserve be shown in budget?
Yeah, I can say that, this operating reserves are not possible for all organizations. It's one of those things that might take time to get up to building operating reserves. But if you're in the position to do that, we certainly advocate for that. A standard is maybe to build up to 3 to 6 months worth of operating reserves. Again, that won't happen overnight. One strategy could be to include a line item in your budget to help you meet the goals over a period of time to build up those reserves. So yes, you could certainly do that as a strategy to try to build up some operating reserves for your organization for a rainy day, the event you lose a funder or your earned revenue is a little bit less than you anticipated it to be. So you can certainly include that if it makes sense for your organization for the year that you're budgeting for.
Tracy, can I ask a question here? So accrual accounting versus straight accounting, what's the benefit and what's the pitfall of that from the vantage point of a nonprofit when you start looking at funds, pledged funds versus actual cash on hand?
Yeah, so the difference between accrual and cash basis accounting is sort of what you were referencing about when you record different aspects of revenue and expense. So if you're on an accrual basis and you are awarded a grant, you would go ahead and record the full amount of that grant even before you've received the actual cash payment for it. So if you have multi-year grants, for example, so an organization or a foundation has awarded you, $5,000 a year over 3 years, you're going to record the full $15,000 when that grant is awarded. And then you're going to receive those payments year after year. And you need to make sure that you're paying attention to what's sort of been recorded on paper, and then the payments that have come in and what expenses that revenue is set to cover over a multi-year grant. The statements that we were just looking at were on an accrual basis, which is why you have things like deferred revenue. The cash basis is you're recording cash as you receive it, and you're recording expenses as you pay them, not in advance, like an accrual system. I'm not a CPA in full disclosure, so I don't know that I can really speak to sort of the benefits of accrual over cash. I think it depends on your organization. It's something that you would talk about when you're setting up your organization. I don't know, Dr. Palmer, you might know, they might even ask you about it in your Form 1023, because she mentioned you're going to have to set your fiscal year. It kind of depends on your organization and what makes sense and the types of revenue and expenses that your organization has itself. So I'll give you an opportunity to speak to that if you want to, Dr. Palmer.
I'm going to agree with you. And I think when you look at, if you go back to the image we were looking at and you notice there were a lot of grants in that portfolio, like probably 60%, if you put those three sections together. And if you're paying attention to actual dollars that you have on hand and you're concerned about cash flow, then I think that also informs what approach you use. Sometimes nonprofits get into a little bit of financial trouble when they use the accrual approach because those dollars are not there. They're not there yet. It looks like it is on paper, but they're not there yet. So I agree with Tracy. It's more of what your organization decides that it is going to work best. But the accrual basis does give the impression that there are dollars maybe available that really are not available yet. They're going to show up in your receivables.
Absolutely. So you have to make sure you really understand that and you monitor it and that you make sure your board and other members of your staff understand that.
Thank you both.
Mm-hmm. Is there any other question? No. Okay. So we've got a few more points we want to make. And Tracy, stay right with us because we got a few more points we want to make. The 990 form is where we're headed. That is the next document that we're going to look at. And some of you may be familiar with the 990. The 990 is filed every year, and nonprofits typically file it at the end of the fiscal year. I think you have about 3 months to actually submit it. Once your fiscal year ends, there are on occasion where nonprofits will inquire with the IRS for an extension, and sometimes they will give an extension on submitting it. But it is expected that your 501c3 is going to submit it. About 5 years ago, the IRS went through this purging, and any nonprofits that were on the books that had not filed their 990, they dropped them as a 501c3. So you want to make sure that you are holding up, that you're being accountable in that way. When you look at the 990 form, I want to make one primary point, then I'm going to let Tracy talk about that from her perspective. When you look at the 990 document, look at item number 19. Item number 19. This is where you will get the figure as to whether or not that nonprofit is experiencing a deficit, breaking even, or has a surplus. And so when we're studying nonprofits, a lot of our philanthropists that really understand this form, they're going to go straight to item 19, and they're going to look to see to what degree you are showing a surplus or breaking even. That's important. When you start seeing a deficit over several years, and especially if it's a high figure, like 5 figures, 6 figures, then that is showing that's a danger zone. But I want to just highlight that this is the form. Every nonprofit completes it. It's an expectation that we do this. The IRS expects us to submit this. And Tracy, I'll let you comment from there.
Yep. So as Dr. Palmer was referencing, all tax exempt organizations need to file the Form 990 or some version of it annually with the IRS. It's actually due the 5th month after the 15th day of the 5th month after the close of your fiscal year. So if your fiscal year ends on June 30, your 990 would be due, the 3rd month, November 15th. There's a standard form 990, which is what's on your screen now. There's also a 990 EZ or a postcard. Most organizations will fill out the standard form 990, especially if you have $50,000 or more in gross receipts. The one thing I always share about the 990 that people may not think about is use it to tell your organization's story. Use it to share your accomplishments throughout the year. And this comes through the statement of program service accomplishments. And I'll show you that section in just a moment. I also want to remind you that this is a public document. So it gets filed on GuideStar. You should include it on your own website, like we saw with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and it needs to be made available to the public. And as Dr. Palmer mentioned, it's a way for funders and potential donors to go and look at the financial state of the organization. This first page that you're looking at is just a summary page of the rest of the form and the schedules. So if I could get you to keep scrolling down, Leslie, yeah. So this is the statement of program service accomplishments. So this is where you can add narrative to tell all about what your organization has done in its specific program areas throughout the year. We do this section as a team. I would ask Lisa and Rebecca and Leslie to fill out, all the learning activities that they did through the year, the number of people that they've served, that sort of information. And you can use the Schedule O that's referenced there to tell as much as you want. It doesn't have to fit on these lines that they're showing here. So I encourage you to do that because the public can go and read about what you've done for the year. So if you keep scrolling to the next section. So this next section is just a checklist of required schedules. So depending on how you answer these questions over the next couple of pages will determine what additional schedules your organization is required to complete and file. And there's a number of different sections. We're not getting into that today. We're just doing a high level overview of the standard form. So I'll get you to keep scrolling, Leslie, probably through this next page as well, because that's just a continuation. So part 5 is going to ask you questions related to tax compliance and, the number of W-3s that you issued for staff, if you had unrelated business income, those sorts of things. If you scroll down to the bottom of this page 5 that we're on, sorry, actually keep going a little bit, Leslie. This is where I was getting to. And then there's a governance section, which is going to ask you questions regarding your board, your governing documents. They'll ask you things like, have there been significant changes to your bylaws since the last time you filed? And if there is, you're going to explain what those are in the Schedule O. It's going to ask you about your committees and things related to the government body in Section A. And then Section B is going to talk about policies. So they're going to ask you, have you provided a copy of this 990 to your board before you filed it? Do you have a written conflict of interest policy? Do you have a whistleblower policy? Document retention and destruction? And also your compensation policy. So what's your process for determining compensation for key employees within your organization? And you can keep scrolling, Leslie. This last section C, I'll have you stop right there for a second. This is the disclosure section. So this is going to ask you questions about how are you making this available for public inspection. So is it on your own website, on another's website, which could be GuideStar, or if someone asks for it, you're just providing it to them upon request. So they're going to ask you to note that in the disclosure section. And you can keep scrolling. The next part is just getting information about your board of directors and your key employees or your highest compensated employees. You would fill this out if any of that is applicable to your organization. And Leslie, you can keep scrolling. I think the rest of this is, yep, keep going. That's the same section. The rest of these parts of the forms are just basically summaries of your financials for the year. So these are there's your statement of functional expense, your summary of revenue and expense, and then this is a reconciliation of your balance sheet. So it's just another way to summarize and report to the IRS what's happened within the organization over the course of the year. And Dr. Palmer, if there's anything else you want to add, that was just a really high level overview of the 990.
Thank you. The 990 again is the form or the document that we're expected to submit as a 501c3 at the end of the fiscal year. So we have learned about guidelines and policies. We have learned about the different financial statements. We have reviewed a budget sample and a template. And we've talked about diversifying revenue. All of that is necessary to help us to complete the 990 and to complete and write and compile an annual report. And so notice the example that we use for the financial statements and the 990 is for an organization. And so there's an annual report on that same website, Big Brothers Big Sisters of Massachusetts Bay. And there's an annual report that supplements or that's a part of that financial reporting for that year. And so each nonprofit is expected to do an annual report. The documents, and so when you scroll down on that website, you'll see a list of the different annual reports. And basically the annual report, we're pulling from the 990, we're pulling from those financial statements that we've done all year, and we're compiling that in a way to communicate to our stakeholders how we not necessarily performed, but what took place over the course of the year. And so there's a financial report. The image that we showed at the beginning, that pie chart comes out of that annual report for that particular nonprofit. And so that's important to remember. The audit and the auditor's report, the document that you're looking at is the auditor's report for that year. All of those financial statements. And oftentimes you will see this particular document, it may say audited or unaudited, because sometimes we get kind of a preliminary reporting of what this looks like. And then some nonprofits may actually have their finance staff and or board treasurer, finance committee generate that document, but it may not necessarily be an audit. So that is that's kind of the way that in which we use that information. In your handout booklet, you also have what are considered general accounting principles. These are principles or practices that are generally in play when we are doing finances, not just for nonprofits, but accounting in general. And so this is a way, or at least a list to kind of help you begin to think about or assess where are we in terms of our practices that we engage in compared to not. So that's kind of where we are there. There is what's called a financial accounting standards board, and that's where these general accounting principles, I'm pulling out my manual here. We're over here. If you look at page, what is it, 10, I'm getting there. If you look at page 104, that's where you'll find those basic tenets in terms of general accounting principles. And that's something that we refer to and have you to kind of think about as it relates to your finances. As usual, we tend to have quite a bit of information. As Tracy started off saying, we could go from A beyond Z. You know, we normally say we go to A to Z, but we could go from A beyond Z in terms of what it is that we could focus on related to this topic. Our plan for this particular part of our learning is, again, to understand those half a dozen documents and what they mean and how they align with managing a nonprofit organization. And Tracy, I'm going to let you have the final say about our whole topic of financial management.
Yeah, just thank you all for hanging in there with us. I know it's a lot of information. As Dr. Palmer said, we could keep going and get further down in the weeds, but I hope that that was a good overview and provide some context for you all, taking us back to where we started in terms of the diversified funding. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. You know, I'd be more than happy to try and answer them or find some resources that will help you all.
Thank you, Tracy. If we could go to the slide 18. This kind of officially closes out our topic on financial management. We're going to take a break and come back and tackle fundraising. But if we could go to that final slide, I'm sorry, slide 18, back one, here we go. So back, yeah, here we go. So this is where we started, right? This is where we started. We started by looking at this image, and this idea of diversifying revenue is related to fundraising, and that's our next topic, fee for services, grants, contracts, investments, endowments. Every nonprofit is different, and the resources, financial resources and products or services that you have at your disposal are going to be different. And so it does take some intentional planning and strategizing around how you're actually going to manage the way dollars enter and exit, and how they enter and exit your nonprofit organization. So that concludes our topic on financial management. And if we could go back to the gallery now, we're actually going to take a 5-minute break. And then we're going to come back and do some work related to fundraising. I'll go ahead and tell you, we'll be picking up with fundraising, a part of our fundraising topic next week. So team, we'll be doing that. But we do want to go ahead and kind of break ground, if I could say it that way, with our fundraising topic today. So we're going to take about a 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back. So it's 12 o'clock, 11:59. We're going to come back at 12:05, and we're going to go right into fundraising. Kind of come back to our workspace. That was quite a bit of info, I would add. But again, all of that is pertinent to trying to make sure that we're on the right track as it relates to managing our finances. I know that there were some questions in the chat that we may have not been able to get to. We will revisit those and try to bring back some information for you as it relates to those questions. So that's kind of where we are with that topic. Our next topic is fundraising. So I want to first do just what we did with the financial management topic. I want to kind of go through what you have in your manual. We will pick up with fundraising when we get together next week, but we will move forward and get at a really good stopping point today, and then circle back and make sure that we finish what we start here. So in your manual, if you start at page 106, the handouts run all the way up to page 124. So let's kind of get the overview, and let me point out what we have. So we have a sheet here that tells us what fundraising is not. Sometimes we get a little confused as to what fundraising is and what it isn't. And then we have another handout that pretty much kind of defines fundraising in a real practical way. We have another that's fundraising pitfalls. The stages of fundraising. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on these stages. There's ultimately 3.5, I would say, stages. We do have stewardship as a part of understanding the stages of fundraising. And then when you get to page 110, we've got stages of fundraising. We have a worksheet, and we've got the type of fundraising one might do based on what stage you're in. And here we're basically talking about prospects. So ideally, when we fundraise, we want to continue to raise money with the current donor base that we have. If we don't have a donor base, then we should be starting one. And then as we proceed over the years, we move into having a real solid donor base, and we continue to cultivate that existing donor base while identifying new prospects and then soliciting those individuals on a regular basis. So that what you see on page 110 is a way of framing the previous handouts. We're going to work through a prospect identification activity as a part of learning about fundraising, where you will create an individual prospect list, which moves on to the next part of that, of generating a master prospect list. And we will do that as one big nonprofit, right? So we'll do this as one big group, and we'll walk through how that works. And then you have in your packet people rules of fundraising, which is accompanied by donor bill of rights. The donor bill of rights has been around for years in terms of if we're going to receive donations from individuals, then they have rights, right? There's some things they should expect from us. And then we're going to talk about having a donor base and how important that is. And then the whole idea of if we don't ask, we don't necessarily know what we might get. So we're only going to raise money if we ask for money. And that's not always the task that some of our board members want to do, nor staff in some cases, but nonetheless, it's important. And then on page 117, we have just a plan, kind of like a fundraising plan, just this is in a Word doc in terms of creating different ways that we can approach donors. So we'll spend some time talking about that. And then you'll see our stages of fundraising worksheet that follows that. We'll revisit that again once we take a deeper dive into our work. And we can go on to page 120. We'll focus on 119 when we get together next week. But the pyramid of giving, this is a common way of thinking about fundraising. And what goes with that is page 121, types of giving and types of fundraising. And so we'll take a deeper dive into that, breaking down the pyramid and understanding how the pyramid works. So this is, in essence, kind of an overview of what we're going to tackle when it comes to fundraising. If we could go back to the presentation. So as I mentioned in our handout manual, you have two pieces of information. What is fundraising, some of the fundraising pitfalls, and then fundraising definition. And so overall, our focus when it comes to fundraising is that we're wanting to raise money. It doesn't mean that we won't accept other forms of assets. We will. Sometimes we receive cars and vans and buildings and land and real estate. It could run the gamut in terms of what we actually might acquire when we are engaging in fundraising. But the overarching focus is for us to raise cash. That's the focus. And so I oftentimes share with nonprofits that grant writing, while it is a way to bring dollars into the organization, it's not necessarily what we would consider fundraising. Fundraising is when we're getting cash donations from either individual donors or groups or businesses or other entities. When it is a grant and there is an award and there's a contract and there are goals and there's reporting and all of those things that come with grants and contracts, we don't necessarily consider that fundraising. Do we count those dollars as it relates to our bottom line? Yes, we do. But if we're really being true to what fundraising really is, then it is the focus on raising cash. And so I'm going to pause here. If we could go back to the gallery, I'm going to pause here just to see if we have any kind of thoughts or comments about just this kind of foundation that we're building before we move into the first stage. And we'll get through the first stage, and then we'll come back and finish this up on next week. Any thoughts or what comes to mind when you think about fundraising? What are you thinking? You can use the chat or you can unmute and share with us. I see some comments in the chat.
I'll go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Virginia.
Hi, I'm Virginia. When I think about fundraising, I think about an opportunity to tell people about our great organization and the impactful work that we do, and provide an opportunity to join us in supporting the work.
Thank you. It is definitely an opportunity to showcase all the great work that we do, but it's also an opportunity to talk about challenges and what we need in order for us to overcome those challenges. So absolutely, Virginia, it is definitely an opportunity to toot our own horn, to highlight the good that we're doing, etc. Anybody else have any thoughts?
We have a lot of comments about it's not for the introvert. It's about relationship building.
Yes.
Changes in the model of fundraising. Not asking is always a no. Intense, but a must. Someone's seconding Jay Davis. I must have skipped her comment. The second, someone's and then building relationships is another.
Okay. So one of the things that I typically share when I'm doing any type of training or meeting with nonprofits about fundraising is it doesn't happen overnight. You know, we can't fundraise for payroll in 30 days. I mean, we can, but it might be a little stressful. So fundraising, there should be a master plan in terms of what fundraising looks like for your nonprofit. And there are some very typical principles and tenets of what we do when we fundraise. One of the things that we do in this workshop about fundraising is we focus on the stages of fundraising and what happens in each stage. And our focus is around building that donor base and identifying prospects and cultivating those prospects to stewardship, right? To giving, and to study the donor base every single year, because I think someone said it earlier, I think it was Chris. You know, fundraising is not something that happens 1 month a year. Fundraising for nonprofits is every day. Every opportunity that we have that's not planned, right? We should be ready, and we should definitely be working from a master plan as it relates to fundraising. It's not as effective to generate dollars through cash donations when we're doing it sporadically, or we do it for a couple of years and then we don't do as well with it the next few years. We know that executive directors change. You know, sometimes our executive directors retire, sometimes they resign and go on to other things. And so it is important for fundraising to be a partnership with the board, the staff, and the executive director. So it is working together. Tracy mentioned this when she talked about financial management. Really, all that we do for our organizations, we should be doing it collectively, so that there's not one person that is shepherding this work that we do, whether it's financial management or whether it's fundraising. So I wish I could give you this magic recipe, right? To tell you exactly what and how you need to go about raising $1 million in 90 days. I don't have that. That's not how it works. But what we do know is that there are some very practical principles that if you work them consistently, you will start to see the results, and you'll start to see those dollars come in from the perspective of fundraising. There's no magic to it. It takes work, and it takes daily, hourly work. And again, with a master plan, And so the way in which we framed our workshop on fundraising is around the 4 stages of either securing new prospects to give or working with existing donors for them to continue to give as they have habitually, but to also have them think beyond that to giving a more thoughtful gift over time. And so we're working to do that from this framework. So there are 4 stages that we talk about. That is identification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. I'm going to say those again. Identification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. And the handouts for those is on page 109 and 109 and 110. And so that's where you'll see that work. And so this work around identification is specifically related to identifying donor prospects if you don't have any. And if you do have prospects, or you do have identifying prospects if you don't have them, and working with existing donors so that they minimally give as they have given, right? If we're talking about within a year, for them to continue to give or to give at a higher level. And so the identification of our prospects is a way in which we start this off. So before I conclude, just know that this is where we're going to start on next week, is this first stage of fundraising, which is identification. And if I could just if you could do a thumbs up reaction or not, how many of your organizations do not have an existing donor base? Like you don't solicit donations, you do not have a donor base, like it does not exist for your nonprofit. Give me a thumbs up if that is the case for you, because that tells us where to start. So I see 1, 2, 3, 3, 3 doesn't exist at all. 3. So it looks like most of your organizations have individuals, a group, right, of individuals or a base of individuals that are giving to your organization. So one of the things you want to think about there is segmenting that donor base as to who has given habitually, right? Like who gives over and over and over again, and then who is thinking or has given thoughtfully, like beyond their regular giving. And then there is a segment of donors each year, right? When you solicit for donations, there is that group of what we call impulse donors, meaning they're giving the first time ever to your organization. So when we think about prospects, and then I'm going to conclude, team, here. When we think about prospects, we should be thinking about segmenting, right? When we think about prospects, we should be thinking about people that have never given, ever, people who have only given once, people who have given habitually, right? Donors that have given out of habit, and then those individuals that are what we call thoughtful. So I'm going to say those again. We want to think about, when we think about who's given to our organizations, we want to think about, and we're talking cash, like whether it's $1 or $10 or 50 or 5 million, if they've given, we want to think about it in terms of prospects, they've never given, ever. Impulse, they've given at least once, just one time. Out of habit, right? Habitual donors, they've given 3, 4, 5 years consistently, 3, 4, 5 years. And then thoughtful, they've given out of habit, but they've also given in like major campaigns, or maybe they've left, maybe they have a bequest and they've left resources to your nonprofit. So when we return next week, we're going to pick up with prospects. That's where we're going to pick up. And we're going to continue to move through ways that we can grow our donor base. Because this is the thing. We want to secure as much unrestricted dollars as we can. Things are changing so fast that's kind of where we want to be. We want to diversify our portfolio, yes, but we also want to make sure that the majority of the dollars that come in, that those dollars are coming from individual donors. I mean, that's a goal. It's a goal that's not easy to achieve, but it's definitely a goal. Now, I say that, but your nonprofit, your board, all the key stakeholders, you may have a different strategy, and that's okay. But we do know cultivating a donor base is very, very important. And so that's kind of the focus of where we are. I do see a couple questions. We'll take those, and then I'll turn it back over to the team to talk about how we're going to work together next week for our last session of the Institute.
I'm just trying to
I see
which-
a couple of questions, Lisa.
Yeah. Will you briefly discuss next week fundraising software available that nonprofits can use depending on the
We do.
sophistication of the track?
We do talk about that, yes.
I don't see specific questions as such. Others are just comments.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
well, we can pop the presentation back up. It was great working with all of us today, as usual. We have digested a lot. Have a great week.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that, Dr. Palmer, and we're really grateful to have Tracy join us, and Lisa, thanks for helping us MC, and also Leslie, she's behind the scenes, working behind the scenes, and just really appreciate all of her support to keep the train moving and coordinating all these different tabs. It's quite impressive, actually. Want to just mention, go ahead and just mute. There we go. Want to go ahead and mention quickly graduation prep for next week. You all will receive an invitation to participate in a short video contribution. The company is called Montage, and it basically gives you some prompts and allows you to record a quick 30 seconds or less type send off to all of your classmates. It'll have some prompts asking you sort of like what you've learned, what you take away from this experience. It's just a really great way for us to compile those and share those with the group as our graduation video. So it's completely optional. You don't have to participate if you don't want to, but it's really fun to see people's faces and to have something to take away from what we've all been through these past, it will be 6 weeks. We'll have some graduation themed Zoom backgrounds that you can download to help us celebrate graduation at the end of our session, usually about the last 20 minutes or so. You all have confirmed your mailing addresses already when you registered for the class, so we should be good there. If you're by chance your mailing address has changed since you registered for this course, or you have a different one you'd like us to send your certificate and a class photo, please go ahead and shoot that to me. You can reply to the wraparound email or to my email address here is rback@ncnonprofits.org. And then I wanted to go ahead and just mention the Duke Nonprofit Management Certificate. They have a new process wherein anyone who's interested, we send your name to them and they begin that process with a PDF, a signable PDF. So you can fill in the responses that are required on that sheet. You sign off, it gets sent to us, and we sign off acknowledging that you participated and completed those sessions. And then we go ahead and send it back to you, and that's when you can forward your payment for those credits. So more to come on that. We'll talk about that next week. And last but not least, wanted to just go ahead and pop the evaluation link for this session into the chat. Invite you to provide your feedback as we enter into the last session. And thank you all for your time and your feedback and your participation. I'm really enjoying just seeing collectively how you all are being a part of this whole experience in this series. So thank you. And with that, we'll see you all next week. Looking forward to it. And we'll talk to you then. Everybody stay safe. Enjoy some nice warm weather.
Thank you.
Great job, Rebecca, Dr. Palmer, and Tracy.